Thank you so
How are
much,
you?
Danya. I'm
Thank
doing
you.
good. How are you today?
I'm super excited about our chat.
I'm very excited, very excited. Just want to make sure that you can hear me clearly.
I hear you.
Okay, good, good. First of all, I want to thank Danya, um, for that introduction, and I'm really excited to be having such an important conversation with you here today, Alexis. But first, I want to start really by creating a safe space for us, for you and I, to have a meaningful, real conversation. And for our audience, hopefully our discussion will be part educational, a little entertaining, and most of all, insightful and empowering. So let's get into it. So I'm a firm believer that people's personal stories need to be told and are important to hear. So I'm going to level set and start with a bit of your background and what brought you to General Motors and ultimately to Cadillac specifically.
Well, absolutely. First of all, I'm excited about the opportunity to talk to you and Brand Innovators. This couple of days of these discussions, I think, are important and obviously very timely. Leading the multicultural team here at Cadillac has been exciting, as many of you can imagine, over the last 6 months. And then even prior to that, the work that I've been doing. A little bit about my background. I'm one of 11, so I have five brothers and five sisters. My father is an entrepreneur and came to the US from Jamaica when he was 12. And so, as you can imagine, I have traveled extensively because of him. And I think within many of us, all of us, especially in my family, there's that entrepreneurial spirit. Most recently, the last 5 years, I had the opportunity to work in our retail marketing space and after sales for our General Motors brands, responsible for about 4,200 of the dealerships in that service lane experience. And through that, I worked on a project revolutionizing the service lane experience. And it was to make the service lane more of a seamless experience for consumers. We knew that they were coming in with a lot of anxiety. And so my project was really to reinvent the way you experience your service experience at the dealership. That took off. I led a pilot through seven dealerships across the US and had the opportunity to go to Dubai after that, lead culture and the marketing team there for a year and a half. And then I came back to the US, repatriated to New York, where I was part of the Cadillac team, led our startup efforts with Book by Cadillac, which was a subscription program. And then I came back to Michigan a little over a year and a half ago in April when the team came back, the brand came back, and have been leading this team responsible, for African American, Hispanic American, LGBTQ plus those audiences, and also specifically Chinese American because we tend to sell the most vehicles from the Cadillac brand in China. So yeah, it's a long road here, but it's been really exciting. And as I listened to the previous panelists, we're in the midst of revolution, but also brands have to evolve. So I'm glad that we're sitting down and talking about we are one of these brands who will continue to evolve. In the words of our CMO, so we pivoted and we evolved, and we're making the necessary changes to really be relevant at a time like this. Yeah.
Yes, that is awesome. And to hear that you got to work in Dubai, like that's a beautiful city, and I had the chance to visit there one time. So I know that must have been an awesome experience. But your title, your current title is Head of Multicultural Marketing. And for those who may hear that all the time, they hear multicultural exactly what it is you do. I respond and how that
Yeah, Tony. So from soup to
moving
nuts,
forward.
anything.
Alexis, you still there?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you. Soup to nuts, anything that's not typically general market. So whether it be advertisements, activations, influencers, everyone who is not, in our general market audience. I'm responsible for finding opportunities. We have an agency of record, Spike DDB, that we've worked with for, nearly the last decade as our multicultural agency. So we work extensively with them to help us, generate ideas. Right now, one of the big projects we're working on is shooting a commercial specifically for our new 2021 Escalade for the Hispanic audience. And so we'll talk about that a bit later, but just really excited about, having the opportunity to really tell a genuine story from the perspective of the Hispanic community to the Hispanic community. So, those are the type of things day to day that I'm responsible for: advertisement, commercials, like I say, influencers, and activations, even virtual activations. We're in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month right now for another week or so. And so we have, many activations that we're doing nationally, virtually. And we just finished last week Playbill. So really excited about that type of work. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is awesome. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, the partnership that your with your the 2021 flagship Escalade. So I want to talk about, you partnered with award-winning acting brand and campaign. Can you talk a little bit about the theme of this partnership and why, and specifically, why Regina King makes sense for the brand?
Yeah, well, when you think of Cadillac and when you think of where we are and where we are headed, really, our mantra tends to be never stop arriving. And so now as we flash over to Regina King, she's bold, she's sophisticated, she continues to arrive. But she also has this activist piece to her that we absolutely respect and love. If people have looked at her Twitter account over the last couple of days, she's encouraging people to vote. If we look at her evening at the Emmys, how spectacular she was to acknowledge another African-American female. Those are the type of things that we just absolutely appreciate that she brings to the table. And she is, just a class act. And she's the person who's at the epiphany of her career. But then we know there's more. And that's when we think about never stop arriving, but there's more. And so the 2021 Escalade, there's more. It will, we just launched that strong campaign, but working with her was important. She just, she brought about that authentic connection with the community, but she also, exuded everything, whether it's from her Oscar or just all of the work she's done in film and television. She just exuded, kind of the right message, the moment for the brand. So, we are really excited about that partnership. Many of you saw us partner with her earlier this year. On stage with the Oscars, but now it was so important for us to continue to extend that as we evolved post where we were at in the country. So she made perfect sense and has been amazing to work with too.
Awesome. I love the theme, never stop arriving. And I think I'm probably going to adapt that to just my own personal life, because it's such a powerful statement that I think everyone could relate to. And so you guys did an awesome job with coming up with that as your theme. And kind of a segue there, you spoke to me about having a 360 approach to multicultural marketing. How are you doing the work to make sure that you have representation reflected both on camera for your campaigns and your audiences, but also behind the scenes and the people doing that work?
Yeah, I think it's, we tend to, especially at a time like this, listening to the panelists before us, it's so easy, and people may consider it very low-hanging fruit to say, okay, just cast a multicultural or face in our advertisement to say we're doing things. And really, that's the beginning, or that's the low-hanging fruit. Really, when you're impacting communities and impacting lives, the way that you really do it is the way that we're doing in this Hispanic ad. The Never Stop Arriving is a story that resonates about resilience and bravery with many people. So now we're just going to leverage that story with a Hispanic person. And that person is going to be in front of the camera, but we're also going to have Hispanic representation as our creative director from Spike TV. He is a Hispanic person. Executive producer who's on on the team will be Hispanic. So it's that real approach production company. And so that's really how you impact communities, not just, casting. That's, again, low-hanging fruit, the least of it, but you're impacting communities when you start to employ people. And when you start to employ people, that's how a brand really makes a short-term difference, but also a long-term difference. And that's what I'm, have been working with our organization to do. And it's exciting because they've been on board. Our CMO continues to be excited about the work that we've done. My director, our content director, he has been, working with me, understanding, this is what we're doing and this is why. And so it's that level of storytelling that we're able to do that really unfolds, that really is able to unfold far beyond just casting. And so, as a brand, and we think about our statement and how we're committed to communities of color, these are the things that we need to do and continue to do. And we were doing, long before, the civil unrest and the Black Lives Matter piece. So, not peace, but movement. And so that's what I'm really proud of, working with suppliers. Last year, we sourced suppliers that we leveraged that were multicultural. Touche Essentials was one of them. The Lip Bar, we sourced products from them so that even at events, we could give away products from African-American owned businesses. And those are the type of things that we're going to continue to do. And that's really how you build equity. And that's how you give access to some of these small businesses.
Right. And that everything you just mentioned is a head nod for me, because it's so important that the people who are actually doing the work, especially when you're talking about multicultural, those people need to reflect the audiences that you're trying to reach. And so it's people like you and I on the inside that are making sure that the right people are in place to do this important work. So I want to switch gears just a little bit because today's slate of programs with Brand Innovators has really been anchored around inclusion and diversity. And I believe personally that it's a concept that takes on different meanings depending on who you ask. So I just like to understand from you what inclusion means to Alexis. What does it mean specifically to you? If you could just give us your definition.
Yeah, I'll try to give you a short answer because inclusion is a lot. There's examples of, being invited to the party, and inclusion is, being asked to dance. And while I think those are great examples, I think for me, inclusion is that everything that's happening with civil unrest is happening to a person who's responsible for also managing it. And so it's acknowledging me as a person that is, has heard the verdict of, Breonna Taylor, but is also an African-American female, also has to come to work the very next day, working the same day as I hear it, and still has to move through and then still strategize for the organization, but I am still healing. So inclusion is respecting Alexis Kerr as a person and what I'm going through, whether you consider it trauma or I even consider it trauma or not, and saying, how are you doing?
Yep.
To me, how are you doing? Do you need a moment to talk, or, hey, this is happening, how is it impacting you? Or just, that's at the heart of, we can go over these fluffy, fabulous examples, but that's at the heart of connect with me as a person, just like one would connect with someone who's at a breast cancer walk, you would address them in such a way to be focused on, how are you doing? How is your healing? That conversation. So it's engaged with me as an African-American female trying to do an amazing job but also dealing with all of this. So I'm not seeing this from the outside. I am dealing and healing, and I'm also working and doing a fantastic job because I'm guiding the team. At this time when I need to heal, I'm working. And it was, to me, a great pleasure when our past president just sent me an instant message and said, hey, can I talk to you? How are you doing, Alexis? How are we doing at Cadillac? What can I do to help? And internally, we had listening sessions with our executive leaders. Our CMO was part of that. Our vice president of sales was part of that. Just listening to our African American employees, starting at home, really saying, what's going on? How is this environment as an African American or Black employee? How is this environment impacting you? And just listening, and I think that's at the beginning. Then we moved into, I started with another colleague, we started a mentoring program with every African American employee who is interested can have an executive mentor. So that's been kicked off. So really taking action internally, those are the things that I value and I consider. When I think of inclusion, those are just a few of the things that makes me feel, aside from some, fluffy example, those are the real things that make me feel like inclusion is part of where we're headed, and I feel included.
That is awesome. And in a lot of what you just said about just asking someone how they're doing really, and really meaning it. People say, how you doing all the time. It's like, it sometimes just feels like a question that comes out of people's mouths and they don't really care. But where you started about being, invited to the party, then being invited to the dance floor to dance, and then even taking it a step further with inclusion and belonging is dancing like no one's watching. So that is awesome. But as a Black man pursuing my career in corporate America, and I've worked at a number of different companies, I've always struggled with the fact that I rarely ever see senior leadership, the decision makers at the top, who look like me. So talking to you is really, for me, like the type of energy that I always want to bottle up every chance I get. So I want to hear from you about your experience as a Black woman and some of the challenges you faced coming up in the ranks in the auto industry, which, by the way, is often seen as male dominated.
Yeah, I think in any industry, there's going to be challenges. They're just for everyone. Like, if we should start that broad, there will be challenges for everyone in these tech/STEM industries. But you also see challenges even in whether it be creators and directors, in all industries. So if I think about the challenges for women, they're across the board. I will say, thankfully, being a part of the team of Cadillac, but more importantly, the bigger organization, GM, I have been able to have female mentors, some who are now still with the organization, some who have gone on to bigger and greater jobs and exposure. At GM, I have been able to have women, African American as well as not, who have supported me, who have say, I see you, sis. Here's a way that you can pivot. Here's a way to have managerial courage. Here's a way to have presence. It's that mentoring, sometimes that silent mentoring, sometimes that text after a presentation. Those type of things have been really, really helpful to navigate quite transparently. The other thing is, I feel like over the last year, I've really come into my own voice. And part of that is something that is not necessarily always taught, but it is mastering the language. And so, we hear, you're not qualified because of this, or we don't like this idea because of that in any environment. And so when you understand the language, you can listen to a conversation that you may not even be a part of, and you can understand when decision makers you're like, I've heard that before. They don't really want to do it. Or when it's something that they want to do, you hear different language. And so when you master the language, once you understand the rules of engagement, then you can lean in and okay, this is what I need to say in this moment. So part of the executive presence is just standing in who you are and understanding with great restraint, especially as an African American female, how you will be seen, how you will be heard, but also how to navigate through that. Because other than that, you'll find yourself always complaining, always frustrated, and always reactive. And so when you start to master the language and you start to understand how to pitch an idea, how to push, what are the levers that you can use, how to build the team before the meeting, what are the discussions that are going to happen after the meeting. When you start to do that work, and that's work, those are tools that you need to pull out of your toolbox, and you realize how the decisions are made, then it's not so frustrating, and you don't go to work saying, I want to do this, but people want to do that. You start to master the pieces of the puzzle where it's like, in order to do what I know is right and we need to do, I need to do this. And you can see how that's positioned a bit differently. Yeah.
That is awesome. And I'm so glad that you talked about it. I don't think I've ever heard it in that way, like mastering a language and being able to understand that. Because it definitely is a language and something you have to navigate. And until until someone tells you these things, it's kind of like you're walking around blindly. So the idea of mentorship and taking it a step further, sponsorship is so important, especially for Black and Brown people. And when you mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say something on that mentorship and sponsorship. I'll just give you a tip or two. So one of the great things that people can do, I want us to leave having learned something, hopefully, and just a couple of tips. So on the mentorship and sponsorship, there are many people within the organization that you would love to talk to, engage with, or what have you. Send them a quick email, tell them a little bit about yourself, and then ask, can you get together over conversation for 15 minutes. So you're not making it 30, not making it an hour, 15 minutes. That has worked for me for many, many, many years. And now in COVID, in yourself, just tell yourself that people have time and tell yourself that they want to talk to me. So when you go in with that mindset, Alexis, they want to talk to me and they have time. And so that repositions the narrative and the story that you tell yourself and your notes. So you might write your note a little bit with a little bit more information, and then you're talking about why. And in that 15 minutes, you can cover a lot. And typically it tends to go over, but that's how you're going to have to start building your network, especially at a time like this. And you can do it at your current company, or if you're thinking about exploring new opportunities and making your way somewhere else, you can also do that there. But it's very hard for people to say no to 15 minutes, just psychologically, because it's a little bit of time.
Yeah. That's a very helpful tip, because I know a lot of people can be intimidated about asking for people's time. So I hope everyone out there that's listening is definitely taking notes, because it's so important to initiate the conversations and then follow up on those conversations. So something you kind of alluded to earlier about taking risk a little bit. You talked about testing and failing, and when people decide that they are able to do that when it comes to certain things, but then others, they're more reluctant to do so. So I want to talk about risk and reward. And brands like the ones you and I work for, they want to, quote unquote, get it right. So much so that sometimes they remain silent because they don't want to offend any particular audience of their consumers. So can you talk about the importance of taking risks and possibly making a mistake versus not standing up for something at all and making a statement?
Yeah, I think so there's a lot to unpack in that. But I'll start off with saying that we take risk every day, and the best brands take really calculated risks. For example, when we made our statement, our agency of record worked with us on our statement from Cadillac about how we felt about Black life. When we made that statement, The agency made it, helped us, craft it to ensure that it was authentic. But also internally, we shared that statement with our African Ancestry Network to just make sure, it resonated with our internal audience. And then we obviously shared it with the world in our, on our social media platforms. But also we followed up with that with, hey, here's the things that the brand is doing, and then here are the things also to come. And so there's a lot of things coming. I'm personally excited about our executive leadership and how they're committed to making change. So for brands who are trying to figure it out, who are unsure, I would say assess your internal employees first. I had a 30-minute conversation with another brand yesterday who was just asking me, like, what do we do? We're now, we're North American based, but we're considering I'm over marketing for the entire world and we want to do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, you need to internally talk to your employees first, as I mentioned, the listening session, so we can understand where employees are at, because you don't want to go externally and talk about something that you haven't discussed at home in your house to understand where employees are at and what they need, really what people need, far beyond just words and platitudes and what have you. And the organizations that are concerned about, not starting because they're going to get it wrong. Many organizations do test and learns. And so if you find an agency or record that is multicultural, they can help you craft a statement that's authentic, but they also can help you with initiatives. And so if you start really with the initiatives and you just start doing good work, it's never too late to start. If you start doing good work and making less excuses, you're so busy doing work that is right, that is trying to impact communities, that you'll find yourself that the statements will come, or the external facing things will come. The reason why we as Cadillac were able to make a statement was because we were doing the work. We were already working with small businesses. We already worked with the likes of Regina King and Spike Lee for the Oscars. We already in years past, worked with many influencers. We supported American Black Film Festival for 10 years. We had already, for example, done the work. And so then it's easier to make a statement. And so organizations need to begin doing work. Not necessarily always making donations, but begin doing the work. If you don't have the money for big influencers, find micro influencers who are doing amazing things. There are many of them. The last presentation just said 70% of all, young people feel like they're activists. Grab a couple of them and help them do that work. And when you begin doing the work, more people will come to you because you're starting the process. And then it becomes easier because it becomes part of your DNA. Mm-hmm.
Right. That is such an important point when you talked about starting from within, because a lot of times it could feel like when issues come up, people are so quick to get consultants and go outside. But some of these companies haven't looked within first. They haven't asked the people that are working for them already that could help, or just to even, like you said earlier, check in and how are they doing. So I think that's super important, because you don't want to get yourself in a place where it can feel performative. And we know what that feels like. We know what that looks like. It's like you can smell it, you can see it, you can cut it. So you don't want to be performative. So I'm just so happy that you brought that up and spoke about it in that way. But we're getting ready to go into some Q&A. Hopefully there are some questions being generated that will be sent my way. But you do wear more than just the multicultural marketing hat. And so I wanted to touch on that just a little bit, because you also manage corporate social responsibility and music efforts at Cadillac. And that can seem like a very distinct, separate area. But I want to talk about how you bridge your multicultural hat with your corporate social responsibility and music hat, and how that comes together for you.
Well, thankfully, we've got a team that helps us with that. So the corporate social responsibility, that piece is just personally near and dear to my heart. And much of the work that we do right now, much of the funding that the initiatives that we support, Save the Music Foundation, et cetera, those initiatives are here in Metro Detroit. And because they're in Metro Detroit, they tend to impact Black and Brown communities like over 70%. And so I just work with our team to identify opportunities where the brand can lean in. Either we can bring dealers in for vehicle displays to ensure that we're showing up in a very authentic way in arts and in culture, but we're also bringing arts and culture to our young people. And so when we think about innovation and spurring innovation and learning and STEM and STEAM, through arts and culture is a really big part of that. And so an example of Save the Music Foundation is a great opportunity and effort that we leaned into last year, giving them a grant as an example. So providing instruments to young people in a school here, specifically in Metro Detroit. And hopefully next year we'll continue the partnership to a number of different schools. But later this month we'll have a presentation from them, obviously virtual, but we were able to engage with organizations like that. And part of that is also, a very strong part of our DNA at Cadillac. And so that piece is really important to us. And then when I think of overall music and our strategy and how we continue to evolve on that end, I work with a fantastic counterpart on our team, Victoria. And so we're trying to, whether it be activations or just what type of music and energy we want to infuse in our commercials, at our events, those type of things, when we think about music, the music that we have used for the Regina King spot obviously won't be the music that we use for our new Hispanic spot that will be shown early in November, but it will all have it will have those cultural nuances. It will obviously be Latin, but just, understanding our overall strategy and working with our partners and teams, that's been part of that role. Yeah.
Awesome. And to me, music is one of those great connectors. I think about music and I think about food that really connect people, and it invokes emotion. And it's sort of one of those things that really, you hear a song and it can bring people together in a way that, that is really simple, but not, and it's just has an impact. So,
and Versus is a great example of that. Yeah. I was saying Versus is a great example of that, bringing people together, using a platform of music, just doing amazing work. And we've just seen how that has blown up over the last 6 months. So, yeah, great example of how music pulls us all together. Yeah.
Yes, I know. I was watching Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight with my friends, and that was definitely one of the most fun nights I've had during this COVID-19 craze. But one last thing on a personal note, I want to ask you: do you have a quote or a mantra that you live by? We talked about never stop showing up or never stop arriving as a theme for your recent campaign. I want to know for you, is there a quote or something you tell yourself that you can share with us?
I'm always thinking I can do more. I can do more. There's always within me and inside of me this energy that, says that there's just so much more work that I could be doing, and not necessarily checking things off a list of work, but that I have a bigger contribution to give. And so it is that essence of that never stop arriving. I have more to give, and when I'm always thinking that I have more to give, then that means there's more work to do. It's like your foot should always be on the gas because you're heading somewhere. And so even when even as I journey, I want to continue to bring people along. And I would say over the COVID break, a young lady said something that has just continued to stick with me on panels, is that people of color, it's not that we're not qualified or we're not ready or any of those things. Because if you think about the African American female, she's one of the most educated women in the workforce, but yet one of the most, underpaid. And so the pinning of her saying we just need access. So my overall goal in the work that I'm doing is to provide access to people of color, access to have opportunities as small business owners, access to influencers to work with a big brand. Now, obviously, there's going to be excellence. They have to be bold. They have to be sophisticated, and they are. But they just need access. So I have just been working very diligently to be excellent, but also to provide access to others. So
that is beautiful. That is. And don't get me started on Black women, because we saw an amazing example last night with Kamala Harris. So I'm going to go into these questions over here and see what the people have to ask you. So, let's see. I want to get a good one.
Okay. I'm trying to pull it up too.
Let's see. Okay, here's one. When it comes to communicating with your consumers, how do you think about brand purpose? And how does that impact your approach in marketing? I can read it again if you want.
Yeah, it's pretty much how do we think about the brand purpose and how we communicate. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that question in general from whoever typed it in. Essentially, we have our, brand foundation and pillars. I think it's just delivered in a different way, depending on the audience. And so obviously, if you're thinking about, this discussion in general market versus African American versus Hispanic. So, some would say it would be in language, different music. I would just be thinking of the audience first is how, I would approach it. But the never stop arriving, that foundation, that brand mantra and theme will shine through. Like that piece isn't different depending on the audience. Just the depiction in a commercial or an activation may be different. Hopefully that answers that question. So that purpose, that ethos is still the same. The delivery may be different.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I have a really interesting one here. I feel like you're repeatedly not being heard by your management because you're one of a few that have the courage to be vocal. What suggestions do you have to help communicating among colleagues and management? And we know what that's like when, you're the one that feels like you're speaking up, but you feel like you're not.
So a couple of things. I think one, one, I would try to check my approach. Sometimes our approach just within itself, separate from you, separate from anything else. Sometimes, sometimes it's not going to work, but at other times there's ways in adjusting your approach. And sometimes you're doing it in front of a large group of people versus one-on-one. So I would start to have some maybe one-on-one discussions with leadership and kind of do some storytelling there as to why you need whatever it is, whether it's resources or why you think we should pivot left versus right. Some people tend to go with the documentation route. So if you are having these discussions and they're going left and you need them to go right for a number of reasons, safety, et cetera, I would document it. So, per our discussion, here's an email of the things that we talked about. And beyond that, an approach, I think there's also some value in having a conversation with the other minorities in this group. And so sometimes you're fighting a battle that someone else in the group may have already fought, and then that's why they're a bit more timid and quiet. You may, feel like you have nothing to lose or XYZ, and these other people may have, they may not feel comfortable. Sometimes everybody doesn't agree just because we're all African American females at relatively the same company in XYZ. We just may not agree. So some of that is like, you think you're fighting a battle for whoever us is, but you're fighting a battle for you, and that's why some of your constituents or some of your colleagues can't support you. So I think those would be the couple of things that I would suggest. Hopefully something there is helpful.
No, I think that is, because approach can be everything, and just making sure you have a strategy on that, and communicating across and within the same groups. I think that's so smart. I have another one here about strategies in marketing. So how do you know when you need to change your strategies in marketing? How do you ensure that you are not making assumptions about the culture that you're interested in reaching? For example, there are many different types of Black people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that question, but I would say you get experts. So our agency of record really helps us with that, and your has to be to the ground of what's happening in culture and why it's happening in culture. And so a lot of times people see what's happening in culture, but they don't really understand why and what it means. You might understand what it means to a Hispanic American or to an LGBTQ person, but you might not understand what it means to an African American who's, from the U.S. versus a Black, Haitian, or someone who's, a transplant, or someone who's come from another place. So I think that perspective of what it means, what does this action mean to me as an African American female, but also what does it mean? How can that be translated a little bit different for different audiences? That piece is really, really important. And I think evolving is important. So, you may have something that goes out that actually was perceived in a different way than your intention. So intention means nothing. I also just want to pause there and just say, a lot of times people say intention means nothing if it lands in a bad place. And Ooh. So you have to be able to adjust and evolve if what you intended did not happen. You just can't say that wasn't my intention. That's unacceptable. And so if you are in a process of evolving, and that's what I loved about our brand, our CMO was a visionary to help us move forward in our agencies of record. After COVID, we just evolved when it happened, and we stopped our regular advertisement and changed it to making sure people felt safe, and that our cars are now the home office and they can be just leveraged in a different way. We gave away Wi-Fi for a period for free. So you've got to evolve and adjust. And then in June, it's like, wow, we loved Regina. We've worked with her. So we've evolved in our relationship with her. And she stands for everything the brand stands for in our new vehicle. So it's about evolution, and things may change quite transparently post-election. And so how are we evolving to if there is an evolution that needs to happen? But I think brands have to always be aware, one, of what's happening in culture. How does that affect our consumers? But also, we have a responsibility to people who also aren't our consumers too. Just a responsibility as companies, that social responsibility. And so we've got to own that and continue to adjust based on what's happening. But at the epicenter of that is really experts, whether they internally, externally, who can give you guidance. And so we have social listening tools, we have agencies that help us. And then I don't leave anything on anybody else. I'm responsible for my staff functional area. So part of that is I, watch things. I look at media. I make sure I'm aware, and our partner agency, Spike DDB, does the same for us.
Now, there's a lot to unpack in just what you said, because I want to jump out of my seat right now, because when you talked about intention and that means nothing, it makes me think of a recent conversation I had around microaggressions, and how, someone was saying, well, microaggressions explain what's like, you could say something to me and not have meant to make me feel a certain way, but that doesn't matter. Your intention doesn't matter there, because what matters is how you made me feel. And I had to go into that conversation a little bit and then they realized, well, now that makes sense. How I intended that message to come across doesn't matter at the end of the day. And that's kind of a little bit of what you were touching on in there that just got me really excited. So I think we have about 3 minutes left. I could ask one more question, unless you have some final words for the group. I could let you.
Well, I think while you're looking for a question, I'll just give, a couple of final things. And the biggest one is really that we as marketers are talking to people. A lot of times we forget that, or that can easily be forgotten. We are marketing to people. I say that because people can hear you, digest it, and make inferences from it. And so that means you always have to be as genuine as possible. You have to be as clear as possible, and you have to be able to adjust if it doesn't land where you want it to land. And the other thing that I think is important, especially at a time like this, is to listen. I still listen. I listen to employees, I listen to friends, I listen to foes, to colleagues. In listening, we can learn and understand how people are evolving and how what's happening in our culture is impacting them. And then that's where the sweet spot happens. It's where, there's a need because you've listened and you can address that need. And so, we're doing a lot of initiatives around small businesses. If I think about the initiatives that have come out post our, equality and justice internal initiative, we are, making sure we support small businesses starting at home here in Detroit. And so we have a number of initiatives that, we are rolling out over the next couple of months. And, I'm super proud and excited to be working with our senior leadership team at Cadillac, who really allows me to do the necessary work. It's a lot of work, but do the necessary work at a pivotal time like this, in the midst of a revolution and evolution in our culture. And personally, to everyone of color who's watching, put your foot on the gas, expect absolutely nothing but the best. And the best time to be amazing and excel is now. It is now. There'll be so many opportunities that come your way. Just address them with as much humility and purpose and excellence. And always in your mind be thinking that you can never stop arriving. So there's truly more for you.
Yes. Oh, how many times do we hear that people just want to be heard? And I try to remind myself, be a better listener today than I was yesterday. So that hit the nail on the head for me, and hopefully for everyone listening. And I think that's a great place to end. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation so much, Alexis. I'm glad we had this opportunity, and we're ending right on time. We're keeping Brand Innovators right on schedule.
Yes, and stay connected, Tony. It was definitely a pleasure. I'm online social. I am Alexis Kerr on Twitter and Instagram, and I would love to connect with everyone. So thank you so much. Turn it over to the Brand Innovators team.
Thank you so much, Alexis and Tony. You kicking off our live portion of today. To be honest, I was not ready for the conversation to end. It just felt so personal, and just being able to realize that having just conversations and asking simple questions. I mean, I think sometimes, especially, being working remotely, being apart, we kind of forget to ask the question of like, how are you? How are you feeling? Are you okay? And just being able to listen. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Tony, for all of your poignant questions. And we'll go ahead and move on to our next session. Thank you both.
All
right. Bye.
We are now going to bring two sisters, Antoinette